welcome to the Labor Force Podcast. Stories of the working class in a time of renewed labor militancy and awareness that capitalism is a rotten deal. I'm your host, Mike Strugan, proud member of New York State United Teachers. Greetings, everyone. How many times have we said, what else? How erratic and nonsensical can it get? How insulting can you possibly be to the workers not paid for a month? Flood the zone, distract. We know Trump does it best, such as with the Epstein files, and especially now when an illegal war is being waged that he has no idea how to get out of. It would make you laugh to say it if it wasn't so damn egregious. Federal immigration agents were deployed to major U.S. airports this week during a partial government shutdown that has left TSA staffing severely strained. The administration said the agents would help with tasks like crowd control and line management, and emphasized the move was not intended to conduct immigration enforcement activities, though officials provided limited detail about their exact role. At the same time, widespread absenteeism among unpaid TSA workers have led to long security lines and disruptions, prompting the unusual presence of armed ICE officers near checkpoints. Well, you had to know this would happen.
We need to see your badge number. Show your badge number.
Show us the badge.
This is an illegal arrest. Show the badge number.
It's okay. We'll wait.
I need to see your badge number.
Step back.
I don't know who you are. You could be someone kidnapping her.
Okay, we should call the police. Call the police.
In reporting by the New York Times, the woman and her 9-year-old daughter were walking through Terminal 3 at San Francisco International Airport on Sunday night, heading to their gate to fly to Miami to visit a relative when a stranger in plainclothes approached. "Angelina?" he asked. "Si," she responded. Minutes later, Angelina Lopez Jimenez was on her knees, crying, as 2 immigration agents were handcuffing her in front of her daughter. Turns out, the TSA is sharing with ICE officials the names and birthdays of travelers believed to have been ordered out of the country by a judge. That has made it easier for the Trump administration to detain and deport undocumented immigrants as they pass through airports. Nancy Tung, who is the chairwoman of the San Francisco Democratic Party and a member of the Airport Commission, condemned the detention. Ms. Tung, who said she was speaking in her political capacity and not as an airport representative, said it was frightening to her that airports were now among the growing list of everyday places where immigrants could be picked up. "These are not the violent criminals that the Trump administration talks about," Ms. Tung said. "It's just wrong." At 10:51 p.m. on Sunday night, after she was wheeled away from the stunned crowd, Ms. Lopez Jimenez was booked into a holding room at the airport. At 7:50 p.m. on Monday, she and her daughter were checked into the McAllen Plaza Hotel and Suites in Texas. They were checked out at 3 a.m. Tuesday. Just over 5 hours later, Ms. Lopez Jimenez and her daughter were on a flight from Valley International Airport in Harlingen, Texas, bound for Guatemala. Everett Kelly, national president of the AFGE, the exclusive union representative of TSA officers, issued the following statement. "More than 50,000 TSA employees have worked without pay for over 5 weeks. Hundreds have quit, and Washington's answer isn't to pay them, it's to send ICE agents to do their jobs. ICE agents are not trained or certified in aviation security. TSA officers spend months learning to detect explosives, weapons, and threats specifically designed to evade detection at checkpoints, skills that require specialized instruction, hands-on practice, and ongoing recertification. You cannot improvise that. Putting untrained personnel at security checkpoints does not fill a gap, it creates one. Our members at TSA have been showing up every day without a paycheck because they believe in the mission of keeping the flying public safe. They deserve to be paid, not replaced by untrained, armed agents who have shown how dangerous they can be." That said, let's talk about what happens when the feds can't or won't agree on how to keep the government open. As of Saturday morning, we got a shutdown tied to funding for the Department of Homeland Security, and instead of moving toward a solution, Congress just made things worse. Here's the situation as of this recording. The Senate actually passed a bipartisan deal to fund most of DHS and get things back up and running. That deal had support from both parties and was designed to end the shutdown quickly. But when it got to the House, Republican leadership rejected it outright. Instead, they pushed through their own temporary funding bill, what's called a continuing resolution, that would fund the entire department for a short period. The problem? That bill has basically no chance of passing in the Senate. So now we've got 2 competing plans, both controlled by the same party, and neither side is willing to budge. That's not just dysfunction, it's a political standoff with real consequences. And those consequences are already showing up where working people feel it most: airports. Because DHS includes the TSA, of course, the shutdown means airport security workers have been going without pay. People are calling out and quitting, lines are getting longer, chaos is building, right as travel demand ramps up. So workers are still expected to show up, do their jobs, keep people safe, but they're not getting paid on time. That's not just an inconvenience, that's economic pressure being pushed directly onto workers who didn't create this problem. Now, why is this happening? At the center of the conflict is immigration enforcement funding. The Senate left out new money for ICE and Border Patrol, while Democrats have been demanding limits on how those agencies operate, especially after deadly incidents involving federal agents earlier this year. House Republicans, backed by the president, refused to accept any bill that didn't include that funding. Their position is simple: no immigration enforcement money, no deal. Democrats, on the other hand, are saying no accountability measures, no deal. So what you've got is a stalemate built around power, policy, and politics, and workers stuck in the middle. And here's the part that should really get your attention. Congress just left town. Both chambers are on recess. They went home while the agency responsible for airport security is still unfunded. That's the fucking reality. The people who can fix the problem walked away from it. Now, the administration is trying to patch things together by using existing funds to pay TSA workers temporarily. But even that is unclear. How fast the money gets out, whether workers come back, and how long that workaround can last. So again, the system is improvising at best. And if you zoom out, this isn't just about one shutdown. This is about how political gridlock turns into economic instability for workers. It's about how the burden always seems to fall on the people with the least power in the situation. Federal workers don't get a say in these negotiations. TSA agents don't get to vote on whether they get paid, but they're the ones dealing with the consequences in real time. That's the pattern. Decisions get made at the top, the fallout lands with a big fucking thud at the bottom. And until that changes, these shutdowns aren't just political stories, they're labor stories. Meanwhile, here's a story we're being told right now. Don't worry, this pain at the pump, this spike in prices, it's temporary. Ride it out. Once the war winds down, everything snaps back. Gas gets cheaper, groceries stabilize, life gets back to normal. That's the promise. But if you actually look at what economists and industry insiders are saying, the reality is a lot less comforting and a lot more familiar if you're someone who's been paying attention to how this system works. Because energy prices don't behave the way politicians talk about them. There's this old saying in the industry: prices rise like a rocket, fall like a feather. And that's not just a clever line, that's exactly what we're watching play out. Oil shoots up fast the moment there's instability, fear, or disruption. But when things calm down, when supply starts to come back, prices don't just drop overnight, they drift, slowly, painfully slowly. Even in the best case scenario, let's say the war ends soon, shipping lanes reopen, production ramps back up, you're still looking at 6 to 8 weeks before things begin to normalize. And even then, normal doesn't mean what it used to. Oil could settle at prices higher than before the war even started. And for workers, that lag matters, because the costs hit immediately. Gas jumps $1 in a month. Diesel goes up, jet fuel gets strained, and suddenly everything that depends on moving goods or people gets more expensive. Groceries, shipping, flights. One airline executive even warned ticket prices could jump 20% if this drags on. That's how it spreads, not just at the pump, but across your entire life. And here's the part that should sound really familiar. Once those higher costs work their way through the economy, they don't just disappear when oil dips a little. Companies raise prices fast, but they're a lot slower to bring them back down, if they do at all. So what you get is this ratchet effect. Prices climb quickly during a crisis, and then they settle at a new, higher baseline afterward. Meanwhile, we're being told this is just a short-term disruption. But even before this war started, people were already feeling squeezed. High prices, rising unemployment, that sense that things just aren't adding up anymore. This doesn't hit a healthy economy, it hits one that's already under strain. And if these high energy costs stick around, that's when you start hearing the word recession get thrown around more seriously. Slower growth, higher inflation, less room for workers to breathe. There's also a bigger reality here that doesn't get talked about enough. This isn't just about when the war ends. It's about what's been damaged, what's been disrupted, and how long it takes to rebuild trust in global supply chains. Shipping through a war zone doesn't just snap back to normal because someone signs an agreement. Production facilities don't just flip back on like a light switch. Companies hesitate, routes shift, risk gets priced in, and all of that keeps costs elevated. So when you hear promises that prices will drop very, very rapidly, understand what you're actually up against. A global energy system that moves slowly on the way down, a corporate system that passes costs on to you immediately, and an economic structure where working people absorb the shock first and feel the relief last. Or sometimes never. Because in this system, the crisis is temporary. The higher cost of living, that has a way of sticking around. And more broadly, the reality is the wealth gap in this country is at a modern-day high, and it's not some abstract number. It's showing up in how people live day to day. If you're at the top, things are going fucking great. Money is flowing into the stock market, real estate, high-risk investments. Wealth is compounding, and policies are helping protect those gains. But if you're not in that group, if you're like most workers, everything feels like it's moving in the opposite direction. Groceries cost more. Rent costs more. Utilities cost more. The necessities are a struggle. Nothing is going well. That's not an outlier. That's the pattern. People are burning through savings just to stay afloat, putting basic expenses on credit cards, skipping things like family trips or even a night out, not because they want to save, but because they have to. And here's the part that really hits. The idea of doing better than your parents? For a lot of us, that's starting to feel out of reach entirely. Now layer that on top of what's happening in the job market. Because you'd think, okay, maybe things are expensive, but at least there are opportunities out there. Maybe you can switch jobs, move up, find something better. Except most workers don't believe that anymore. A recent survey found that only 28% of U.S. workers think now is a good time to find a quality job. 72% say it's a bad time. Think about that shift. Just a few years ago, it was the opposite. Most people felt optimistic. Now it's flipped. And it's not because everyone's getting laid off left and right. It's something more subtle and in some ways more frustrating. Economists call it a low-hire, low-fire economy. Companies aren't doing mass layoffs, but they're also not really hiring. So if you already have a job, you're stuck. And if you're trying to get one or get a better one, you're running into a wall. That's why younger workers are especially pessimistic. That's why even college graduates, people who were told they did everything right, are struggling to land anything stable. It's not that the system is collapsing in some dramatic headline-grabbing way, it's that it's stalling, quietly. And when you put those two things together, the rising cost of living and the shrinking sense of opportunity, you start to see why people feel the way they do. Because it's not just that life is getting more expensive, it's that the paths out of that pressure are disappearing at the same time. You can't spend your way out of it. You can't work harder your way out of it if the better jobs aren't there. So what you're left with is this growing divide. On one side, people whose wealth is tied to assets, stocks, property, investments, watching their net worth grow. On the other side, people whose lives are tied to wages, watching those wages stretch thinner and thinner. And the gap between those two groups, it's not just widening, it's hardening. Because when an economy makes it harder to get ahead and easier to fall behind, what you don't just get is inequality, you get pessimism. You get people looking at the future and thinking, this isn't going to get fucking better. And that might be the most important signal of all. Not what the charts say, but what people believe is possible anymore. Once again, we need the fight back. Bloomberg Law reports the ongoing strike by roughly 3,800 workers at a GBSB plant in Greeley, Colorado, highlights growing labor unrest driven by rising healthcare costs and wages that workers say aren't keeping up with inflation. Organized by UFCW Local 7, the mostly immigrant workforce walked out over alleged unfair labor practices and contract terms that included wage increases of less than 2% per year on average, which the union argues fall short of living costs. Workers say they can no longer afford the steaks and briskets that they slice and pack during shifts that leave their shoulders aching. Quote, "We eat ramen," Anthony Martinez, 57, said. He's cut back to pay his rising $2,200 rent and school costs for his two teenagers. I do all this meat cutting, and we don't have meat in the freezer. They point to their own bodies to make the case for raises and better working conditions. One woman flexed a finger that no longer bends properly because of overuse on the job. Another rolled up her sleeve to show the scar from where she said she accidentally sliced her forearm. Another shrugged a shoulder dislocated from the time her meat hook got lodged in a moving belt. That means workers are particularly focused on health insurance, seeking to freeze premium increases after many found that raises were effectively canceled out by higher healthcare expenses, with union leaders saying the company's proposal puts all the risk of rising healthcare costs on workers. The dispute reflects a broader national trend, as rising medical costs, exacerbated by policy changes and custom programs like Medicaid, are fueling strikes across multiple industries, undermining a long-standing trade-off where workers accepted low-wage growth in exchange for affordable benefits. Experts note that when healthcare costs consume most of a raise, it doesn't feel like a raise, and warn that these pressures are likely to remain a central issue in future labor negotiations. Once again, why? Why do we have to do this for-profit healthcare dance when it strains both employers and especially employees? It might be the most ongoing, nonsensical feature of our entire fucking system. And in the education world, strike is also the word, with a couple of agreements reached after work stoppages and another big one in the works. Portland Community College and its Classified Employees Union reached a tentative agreement that effectively ends a historic 2-week strike involving about 700 staff members, with union members later voting to ratify the deal by a strong majority. The agreement includes no cost of living increase for the current year, but provides a 5% raise for 26-27, a lump sum payment of roughly $1,400, improved health benefits, and stronger worker protections. Union leaders framed the deal as a win for dignity and affordability after sustained collective action, while college officials emphasized cooperation and ongoing financial pressures facing higher education. With ratification, classified employees are set to return to work, but the broader labor dispute is not fully resolved as of this recording, as faculty remain on strike and continue negotiating, with key disagreements, particularly over compensation during strike time, still unresolved. At NYU, faculty members reached a tentative agreement on Wednesday to end a 2-day strike, winning substantial salary increases after hundreds walked off the job over a contract dispute. The union, the Contract Faculty United UAW, represents about 950 full-time faculty members who teach roughly a quarter of classes at NYU and are not on track for tenure. Many complain that their pay did not keep up with their tenure-track colleagues or the steep cost of living in one of the world's most expensive cities. Now they're set to receive an average raise of 20% this year and 3.5% increases a year for the remainder of the 5-year contract, according to Brendan Hogan, a union spokesman. On Wednesday, faculty members were expected to return to their classes while the tentative agreement was put to a vote. The university's president, Linda G. Mills, and its provost, Georgina Dopico, told the campus in a letter that all would soon be back to normal. They called the agreement an important recognition of the vital contributions these members of our faculty make to your experience and education, and something the university will be able to sustain over time. Strikes are difficult moments for close-knit communities like ours, Dr. Mills said, but even in moments of tension, we are one NYU community. Wiley Norvell, a spokesman for NYU, said that the deal provides meaningful raises and comprehensive benefits that will improve the lives of every member, and that the office of Mayor Zoran Mamdani played a constructive role in the negotiations. The university and the union said that none of the faculty members would make less than $91,000 starting in September, and that 95% would earn more than $100,000. Mr. Hogan added that our lowest-paid and longest-serving colleagues would see bigger gains, and that the union had won the highest minimum salaries of any unionized, full-time, non-tenured track faculty in the country. And teachers and other education workers in L.A., numbering 37,000, are set to strike April 14th. The union, the United Teachers of Los Angeles, is fighting for a new 2-year contract, and they say if they don't get it, they'll walk. A rally of 30,000 supporting them on March 18th attracted members of other unions, including Service Employees Local 99 and the Associated Administrators of Los Angeles, a sector of Teamsters Local 2010. Quote, "We all started as teachers," AALA Sector President Maria Nichols told the crowd. "We're here to serve the students in another capacity. We will be heard." The union demands a 12.6% base raise over 2 years and more spending for support staff. In a common worker complaint in the high-cost city, the union says its members can't afford to live in L.A. It also wants a 3% general raise this July and smaller classes in the last 2 years of high school. The union says the L.A. United School District has the money. The LAUSD committed $10 billion in multi-year contracts to outside vendors over the last few years, UTLA reported just before the rally. And the district sits on unrestricted total reserves equal to 35% of its total budget, the largest share in the state, one union graphic shows. Yet it's offering scraps to its teachers and staff, the union bargainers report. The scraps in the school district's latest proposals are a 3.5% yearly salary hike and a bonus split in half over the PAC's 2 years, the union says. Once again, LAUSD comes up short, far short of the 17% average salary increase educators are fighting for, UTLA President Cicely Mayart Cruz said in the union's latest bargaining update. LAUSD's latest salary proposal is not enough to fix broken salary schedules. It's not enough to attract educators to LAUSD, and it's nowhere near enough to address the financial struggles educators are facing. There has been little movement at the bargaining table, UTLA's 150-member team says in its latest report to its members. We're ready to strike if they don't change course, they added. All right, to a problem that hides in plain sight, underemployment. Not unemployment, underemployment. People who have a job technically, but not enough work to make that job livable. When a lot of Americans hear part-time work, they picture choice. Maybe somebody wants more time with kids, school, caregiving, or just, a little breathing room. And sure, for some people, part-time work is exactly that. But for millions of workers, it's not a lifestyle perk, it's a trap. More than 6.7 million Americans say they're working part-time not because they want to, but because they can't get full-time hours. That number matters, but what matters even more is what it means in real life. This is not workers scaling back. This is employers holding back hours. And that distinction is huge, because once you see that, the whole issue snaps into focus. Underemployment is not just less money. It's a transfer of risk from employers to workers. Businesses keep labor costs flexible. Workers absorb the instability. If demand is weak, the companies protect it. If demand spikes, the company can scramble people in. Either way, the worker is the shock absorber. The system behind a lot of this is what's called just-in-time scheduling. Sounds efficient, right? Of course it does. The basic model is simple. Instead of guaranteeing most workers 40 hours, large employers keep a lot of them part-time and schedule the bare minimum they think they'll need. If customer traffic is busier than expected, they've got a pool of workers they can call in for last-minute shifts. So one week you get 4 hours, next week maybe 30. Maybe your paycheck jumps around so much it feels like you're working for a slot machine. Same job, same employer, totally different income. And when that happens, the pain doesn't come only from a low hourly wage. Sometimes the instability is worse than the rate itself. Think about it. If you make a little more per hour, but you only get a single 4-hour shift some weeks, what exactly did that raise buy you? Not rent, not groceries for the month, not peace of mind. According to the Federal Reserve, adults who work part-time because they can't find full-time work are much more likely to say they struggle to pay bills or don't have enough to eat. And that makes sense. A household can budget around modest income better than it can budget around chaos. Unstable hours create unstable pay, and unstable pay blows holes in everything. That's the hidden crisis here. We talk a lot about whether workers are employed. We don't talk enough about whether they're getting enough hours to live. And if employers control the hours, then employers are controlling a massive part of workers' economic lives, while offloading the downside onto the people least able to carry it. And this is where labor politics can get a little lopsided. For decades, policymakers and activists have put way more attention on wages than on hours. I get why. Wages are easy to understand, easy to campaign on, easy to put on a poster. Raise the hourly pay, clean message. But income is not just wage times dignity or vibes or good intentions. It's wage times hours. You need both. If one side of that equation is unstable, the whole thing is unstable. There's a good example. In New York City, lawmakers introduced legislation to raise the minimum hourly wage for employers with over 500 workers from $17 now to $30 in 2030. That's well intended. It's trying to solve a real problem. But even a raise of $2 or $3 an hour or more does not do much if some weeks you're scheduled for just one 4-hour shift. That's the thing. A worker can be earning more on paper and still be unable to pay rent on time because the schedule's all over the place. Irregular hours make it harder to pay bills, sure, but it also spills into every other part of life. It can make it tougher to get approved for apartment leases, tougher to get auto loans, tougher to plan childcare, tougher to line up classes, tougher to hold a second job, because to maximize hours at the first job, you have to stay available. And if you turn down a shift, you may get fewer shifts later. That's not flexibility in any meaningful worker-centered sense. That is employer flexibility purchased with worker insecurity. I think one of the clearest signals of what workers actually want comes from Target Workers Unite, a group of rank-and-file Target workers pushing for better conditions. Their first demand is not higher pay, it's more hours. Their second demand is more stable schedules. That order matters. It tells you something. Workers living this reality are saying basically, before you congratulate yourself for talking about wages, make sure we can actually count on work. Make sure the paycheck exists in a predictable way. Make sure we can plan a month, not just survive a shift. And I think sometimes people miss how psychologically punishing this is. It's one thing to work hard and know what your week looks like. It's another to keep your whole life on standby for maybe hours. You're available but not secure, employed but not steady, needed but only when convenient for the company. So yes, wages matter, obviously, but our security matters just as much. If labor policy only talks about the price of work and not the amount of work, it's leaving workers exposed to exactly the kind of instability that makes decent paychecks impossible to build a life around. So what do you do about it? The idea is a federal right to full-time work for many employees who are stuck in unwanted part-time jobs. Specifically, part-time employees at companies with more than 50 full-time equivalent employees would get the option to work full-time after 3 months of employment. And if a qualifying worker makes that request, the employer would have to grant it unless doing so would create an undue burden on the employer. That undue burden language is important. It's a common standard in employment law, so this is not some wild alien concept getting dropped into American labor policy from outer space. It fits with a long tradition. In fact, the case for it is rooted in that tradition. Since the New Deal, U.S. labor policy has recognized that employers do not get unlimited freedom to organize work solely around profit. The Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 gave us the 40-hour work week, the federal minimum wage, and overtime pay. That law was aimed at overwork. Back then, employers were pushing people into 70 or 80-hour weeks, sometimes more without additional pay. The law helped establish 40 hours as the standard. Now the problem, or at least a major problem, is underwork. Not too many hours forced onto workers, but too few hours withheld from them. Same basic question underneath it. How much instability are employers allowed to dump on workers? And we already accept, in other areas of labor law, that workers can claim some stability and accommodation. The Americans with Disabilities Act, the Family and Medical Leave Act, and state workers' compensation programs all recognize that employees may need changes in schedule or time away. And those frameworks also require employers to accommodate returning to full-time work once the need for reduced hours or leave has passed. So the principle is already there. Work is not just a private arrangement where the employer's convenience always wins. The law can require some balance. There's another practical argument here too. Employers often say workers prefer part-time flexibility. Okay, if that's true, then this proposal changes nothing for people who actually want part-time schedules. The obligation kicks in only when a worker asks for full-time hours. And because the rule would apply broadly to large employers, it creates a more even playing field. Companies that treat workers decently would not have to worry as much about being undercut by more ruthless competitors gaming the labor model through chronic underscheduling. That means less hardship, less chaos, and a cleaner baseline for what work should provide. If Americans are willing to work hard, the promise is supposed to be that they can live decently. A real right to full-time work would not solve everything, but it would move that promise a lot closer to reality. On that note, let's take a deep, clean breath, think pleasant thoughts, and transition to happiness rankings, which I know can sound a little soft focus, a little lifestyle magazine, but stick with me because once you look past the branding, this is really a story about work, power, and what it takes to make daily life feel bearable. The 2026 World Happiness Report, like the versions before it, is not really measuring whether people are walking around grinning all day. It generally asks people to rate their lives on a ladder. Basically, where are you between the worst possible life and the best possible life? Then the report looks at broad social conditions that tend to go with higher scores, things like income, health, social support, freedom to make life choices, generosity, and perceptions of corruption. So right away, this is bigger than mood. It's about whether life feels stable, dignified, and livable. That matters because when countries keep showing up near the top, that's not random. It suggests they build systems that reduce panic. Rent panic, healthcare panic, childcare panic, job loss panic. All the little background alarms that capitalism teaches us to call normal. And if a society lowers that noise floor, people report better lives. That should not be surprising, but somehow it still gets treated like a mystery. One thing that stood out in the conversation around these rankings, including in a BBC travel piece looking at why certain countries do so well, is the absence of the big English-speaking powers from the top tier. You don't see the usual Anglosphere heavyweights dominating the top 10. And honestly, that tells a pretty blunt story. A country can be rich, globally influential, packed with luxury consumption, and still leave ordinary people feeling isolated, overworked, indebted, and one emergency away from a tailspin. In other words, national wealth is not the same thing as social well-being. The high GDP doesn't tuck your kid into subsidized childcare. It doesn't shorten your commute. It doesn't make your boss less arbitrary. It doesn't build trust between neighbors. And it definitely doesn't guarantee that a worker can take a sick day without financial fallout. And that's the frame I think we need. Happiness is often sold to workers as an individual task. Meditate more. Optimize your morning. Download an app. Practice gratitude while your schedule changes every week and your rent jumps again. Very convenient for the people making money off the conditions making you miserable. But these rankings point somewhere else. They suggest happiness, or at least life satisfaction, is social, economic, material. It lives in public goods, in trust that institutions won't screw you over, in the ability to plan next month without a knot in your stomach. It's not a personality trait. It's not just whether you're cheerful. It's whether the structure around you allows something like a human life instead of permanent contingency. So when we talk about the countries near the top, I don't want to do the tourist brochure thing. This isn't about cute streets or cozy candles. It's about what workers can count on. And once you ask that question, the rankings get a lot more political. Take Finland, Iceland, and Denmark, countries that keep showing up near the top. The easy version is to say, oh, they figured out how to be happier. But the more useful version is, they build conditions that make life less punishing. A lot of the reporting around these places, including that BBC travel angle, points to trust. And trust can sound vague until you break it down. It means people generally expect institutions to function. It means lower perceived corruption. It means if you pay taxes, you're more likely to believe something comes back in the form of schools, healthcare, transit, leave, support. It means your life is not organized around assuming every system is trying to scam you. That alone changes the texture of a day. Think about how much stress in more market-dominated systems comes from administrative combat, fighting an insurer, fighting a landlord, fighting payroll, fighting for a day off, fighting to get an appointment, fighting to prove you deserve help. When public systems work better, workers spend less of their lives in bureaucratic self-defense. There's also a culture piece here, but I want to be careful with that because culture doesn't float above material life. Collaboration, social safety, lower corruption, and everyday security reinforce each other. If you know a fall won't destroy you, it's easier to trust other people. It's easier to participate. It's easier to imagine the stranger next to you as part of a shared world, not just competition. And then there's access to nature, which gets talked about a lot for these countries. Again, I don't think the point is scenic branding. The point is that parks, trails, water, clean air, and safe public space are part of ordinary life, not luxury add-ons. If recovery from work requires expensive escape, that's one kind of society, but if restoration is built into the place where you live, that's another. Same with safety. Not just crime in the narrow sense, but the feeling that your kid can move through the world, that transit is usable, that public space belongs to people, that life is not one long improvisation around danger and scarcity. Now compare that with work cultures organized around hierarchy, stress, and insecurity. In a lot of wealthy countries, especially the ones that love talking about freedom while letting employers run wild, the workplace teaches you your time is disposable, your health is negotiable, and your future is your personal problem. You're supposed to be grateful for flexibility that really means instability and resilient in conditions that would break anybody. So yeah, Finland, Iceland, and Denmark matter because they're not perfect and not because workers there live outside capitalism, but because they show that life can be structured differently. Less fear, more support, more trust. And once workers see that, the myth that precarity is just human nature gets harder to sell. And it's not only the Nordic countries that open this question up. Costa Rica and Sweden point to a different standard too, and in different ways. Costa Rica's rise in these conversations is important because it disrupts the lazy assumption that only the richest countries can produce high life satisfaction. Reporting around Costa Rica often highlights community, a sense of freedom, and the outdoors as part of everyday life. That matters. People do not live by wages alone, and they definitely don't live by productivity metrics alone. Social connection, time outside, and the ability to experience life as more than a commute between obligations. Those aren't extras. They're part of what makes existence feel worth maintaining. What I like about Costa Rica in this discussion is that it broadens the imagination. It suggests that happiness rankings are not just rewarding cold efficiency or elite polish. They seem to reflect whether people feel embedded in a social world, whether there's some breathing room, whether freedom means actual lived autonomy and not just market rhetoric. Sweden, meanwhile, often gets talked about as a place where equality, public well-being, and access to nature are more deeply woven into ordinary life. Again, not paradise. I'm not saying that. But there's a pattern here. More equal societies, or at least societies with stronger public commitments, tend to give people the baseline sense that they matter beyond their paycheck, that the state is not only there to discipline them, that well-being is a public concern. And easy access to nature keeps coming up for a reason. Not because hiking fixes exploitation, it doesn't, but because when public life is designed so that rest, movement, and beauty are reachable, workers aren't forced to buy back fragments of sanity at premium rates. The good life stops being a private commodity and starts looking more like shared infrastructure. That's the question I keep coming back to. What if we treated happiness that way? Not as a self-help project, not as a branding exercise, but as infrastructure. What would workers demand? Shorter hours, reliable health care, affordable housing, childcare, transit, paid leave, safe streets, clean parks, less corruption, more democratic workplaces. Probably all of it. Because people know, at a gut level, that happiness is built out of time, security, trust, and the ability to live without constant economic threat. And once you say that out loud, the politics sharpen up fast. If happiness depends on material conditions, then misery is not just unfortunate, it's organized, it's produced, which means it can be changed. So think of it not as a ranking, but a demand. Judge economies by whether ordinary people can actually live in them. And if you're here in the great US of A, you be the judge.
Who has the right to eat nutritious food? Well, that doesn't seem like a topic that should be up for debate. It's one some lawmakers are trying to make an issue at the state capitol as food insecurity spreads across the state of New York. Nicole Newman joins us now from the state capitol. What is this all about, Nicole?
Hi, Susan. Well, lawmakers I've spoken to tell me now is the time to act, especially amid federal cuts when it comes to addressing food insecurity. Now, all of this comes as data from the state comptroller's office shows 1 in 9 New York households is struggling to put food on the table.
Robbing Paul to pay Peter. So no matter what we do, it's just not enough.
Michelle Brill gets real about the financial struggle she's facing. She's on Social Security, and some months her bills are more than what her check covers. While waiting in a food distribution line, she tells me she often doesn't have enough money to put food on the table.
Well, I'm on a limited income, and I got bills, and I got taxes, I got everything. So coming here allows me to be able to make me have my home and still have food on my table. So I am very thankful for this.
Right now, there's a proposal being debated in committee in both the New York Assembly and the state Senate that would establish a constitutional right to food in the Empire State. It was introduced last January. The bills are being sponsored by Assemblywoman Nicolay Solage and State Senator Michelle Henchy.
We're hoping that we can get it done this session, and with a constitutional a referendum, hope in 2 to 3 years. So we'd have to do it this year, this term, then do it next term, and then it'll be on the ballot.
You cannot survive without eating. And we often demonize or challenge folks who don't have access to food when we should be making sure that they do.
Senator Henchy explains how this amendment could help New York farmers.
Our farms are about a $6 billion industry across New York. If we can make sure we're expanding markets for our farmers and opening more markets locally in the state, again, we keep those tax dollars circular and we really build a robust economy that puts our small family businesses first while also putting the needs of New Yorkers first.
And in doing so, Susan, both lawmakers tell me that they do believe that this can become a reality.
So, Nicole, why do they feel so optimistic about this?
Well, they point back to 2022 when the state codified the right to clean air and water. They say that they believe that this can follow suit.
Our ranking in this report on happiness, 23rd. So shutdown chaos, workers showing up without pay, immigration enforcement bleeding into everyday spaces, rising costs that never quite come back down, jobs that exist but don't sustain a life, and a system that keeps asking more while offering less. This isn't random. It's not just a string of bad breaks or isolated stories. It's a pattern as usual. It's a pattern where instability gets normalized, where risk gets pushed downward, and where the people holding everything together are the ones asked to absorb the most. Whether it's a TSA agent working unpaid, a meat packer who can't afford the food they process, a teacher fighting for a livable wage, or a part-time worker stuck waiting for hours that may never come, the story keeps repeating. And at the same time, we're told this is just how it works, that the market will sort it out, that relief is around the corner, that if we just wait long enough, things will balance out. But waiting around for this system doesn't do shit. That's why the labor flights matter. That's why strikes matter. That's why even the idea of something like a right to full-time work matters. Because these are moments where workers stop absorbing the pressure and start pushing back on it. So as all this keeps unfolding, shutdowns, strikes, rising costs, political gridlock, the question isn't just what happens next, it's who decides. Because until workers have a real say in that answer, the cycle doesn't break. And until it breaks, these aren't just headlines, they're warnings. Well, that does it for this episode. If you like what you hear, give a rate or review on your favorite podcast app to help me grow. I'm proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network, with over 200 labor shows you can check out at laborradionetwork.org. This has been the Labor Force Podcast. I'm Mike Strukin. Solidarity, always.